this video, we're going to look at the payroll rules system and applying payroll rates to users. Payroll is a time actualization system which calculates user cost per pay period based on a set of company-defined rules. Payroll can be reconciled per pay period as a final check and balance of user costs. Once a pay period is reconciled, the status of all time cards during the pay period are updated to resolved, and the time card is permanently locked. Setting the user's rate type to payroll uses the rule-based time card system. If the user is set to use hourly, day rates, or fixed rates, they will be using the fixed rate system, which is solely calculated based on the hours applied in time cards. Here we can see the view used to reconcile pay periods for all time cards using the payroll rate type. To assign a user's rate type to payroll, go to the users, select your user you wish to change, and select the user's rate. Here we have the option to add a new rate. We can set our start date, our rate, the currency for that rate, any P&W amount, and we can select our rate type. By selecting payroll, we are now required to select a payroll group. In this case, I'm going to select the California and Company Rules Payroll Group. This payroll group contains rules for California overtime compliance, as well as any company-specific rules. To create those rules and to create the payroll group, navigate to Admin, Time Cards, Payroll. Here we can see our existing rule sets. We were just looking at California overtime rules, as well as our company rules. Now you can define your own rule sets, create your own rules and conditions that apply. The payroll rules are the core system which defines the behavior of payroll actualization. And a rule set is a collection of rules to determine the final hourly total and cost per pay period. To add a rule set, click on the plus button next to rule sets. Here we can see our new rule set. We'll give this a name of our demo rules. And we can also give the rule a description. Once a new rule set is created, you can start attaching new rules to that rule set. Click the plus button to add a new rule. When adding a rule or selecting an existing rule, two panels will slide out for editing the selected rule, dividing the UI into 3 total panels. The left panel is the list of rules for the currently selected rule set. The middle panel is for editing the rule conditions, and the right panel determines the rule effect. When a new rule is created, a default condition is applied. To edit this condition, select the options from the Edit Conditions section below. There are multiple conditions which can be applied. In the first column, we have the option to choose if the total billable hours, or if the number of consecutive days worked in a day or in a week, are equal to, not equal to, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, and then we can choose a numeric value. With this initial rule, we can set if the total billable hours in one day are greater than 8. We can now look at our effect and determine what the effect type should be. In this case, we have the options to use our overtime rate, use our double time rate, ignore any additional hours, or convert day to X hours. In this case, we'll leave it to overtime rate. Now we can also add an additional rule to this rule set by clicking the plus button next to rules. In this case, we'll say if the total billable hours in one day are greater than 10, we'll use our double time rate. So now both of these rules will apply to this current rule set. We can also stack conditions. For example, if I create a new rule, and when I say if the total number of billable hours in 1 week from Monday to Sunday are greater than 40, and I'll add an additional rule, if the number of consecutive days worked in 1 week is greater than 5, we'll automatically use our double time rate. Here you can see both conditions need to be met to use our double time rate. Now all 3 of these rules will be applied to this rule set. Now in addition to modifying the rate multiplier, we can also modify the hours. If I create a new rule, I can say if the total billable hours in one day are greater than or equal to 4, and also the total billable hours in one day are less than and equal to 8, we can convert those hours to be 8 hours. What this is saying is if somebody works a minimum of 4 hours, but less than 8 hours, you are guaranteeing to pay them for 8 hours. And I can save that and add this to the rule set as well. We also have the option to cap hours. If I create another rule, I can say if the total billable hours in one day is greater than 12, ignore any additional hours. And I can save that rule as well. Now these combined rules all create a single rule set. Now I can close this panel and see all of our rules that are currently active. You can disable any rules at any time to maintain the rule but not have it currently applied. Now the next thing we need to do is define a rule group. So we'll go over to our Groups tab, and this is where you can have different rule sets applied to a single rule group and have that rule group applied to a user. In this case, we've defined California overtime rules, as well as any company-specific rules that may be guaranteeing X amount of hours, for example. This way, you could create location-specific rules, as well as any company-specific rules, and mix and match them as needed for your different user groups. To create a new payroll group, I click the plus button. I'll call this my demo payroll group. I can add a description, and then I can choose which rule sets to include. In this case, I'm going to choose my demo rules, as well as my California overtime rules. Now that payroll group is available to be added to user rates. Lastly, to work with payroll, we need to configure our pay period. To configure our pay period, you have to choose a start date, as well as the pay period frequency. By default, there is always a base rule for our initial pay period, but you can change your rules by adding new pay periods with their own individual start dates. Our pay period frequency options include every X weeks or specific dates every month. In this case, we've selected specific dates every month, and we'll be using the 1st and the 15th as our pay dates. Now, if I go over to my users, I can select my user rate, and I can choose my demo payroll group. Now, any time cards that come in after September 4th, we'll use this payroll group to calculate the total pay period cost. Now, moving back up to our financials, we can look at our calculated payroll. Here we can choose our pay period. Selecting any date will automatically select the start and end date of the pay period based off of your pay period rule. Here we can see the users that have their rate type set to use payroll and that have entered time cards during this pay period. The rows at the top show our user's first and last name, the start and end date for the pay period, the user's rate, their overtime rate, as well as their double time rate. We can see the amount of standard hours entered, as well as the standard gross pay. Now, if a user had selected an alternative time type, those time types would have been broken out into their corresponding columns. And if there was overtime or double time, that will be recognized here as well. We can see our total hours as well as our total gross. Now, when working with payroll, we can resolve pay periods by resolving all of these time cards at once, which will lock them from any further changes. And we will see the date the time cards were resolved, as well as who they were resolved by. Now, within this view, we can also look at our time cards and our individual information for each time card to make sure that it's accurate. Here's a time card where the hours were adjusted based off of a payroll rule. In this case, we have a time card with 4 hours, and the rules guaranteed a minimum of 8 hours. Now, I do have the option to override these rules. In this case, I'm lowering it back to the original hours entered, possibly if the person didn't meet the minimum requirement for those guaranteed hours. In this case, I'll turn that back off. I can see that my hours have been adjusted, and I can see the new updated daily total. You can also recognize days that have their hours adjusted based off of this blue tick in the left corner. If I select another day, you'll be able to see that more specifically right here. Now, the day marked in blue includes overtime hours. And I can quickly go over to check to make sure that those time cards are accurate. I can see that some have been submitted, but they haven't been approved yet. And if I want, I can actually click into a time card and approve that directly within this view. If there was an issue with a time card, I do also have the option to dispute the time card, enter my reason for the dispute, and the user will be notified when the time card is disputed, at which point in time they would need to edit their time card and resubmit it for approval. Now, at this point, we can actually select an individual user and resolve their time cards. And so now their time cards have been resolved, and I can see that they are marked in green, as indicated that that has been resolved and locked for this time period. Now I'm currently only viewing the selected pay period, but if I turn that off, I can see that these red rows are dates in the past that have unresolved time cards. Now you have two options here. First, you can resolve these time cards in the current pay period to include them with whatever the current time cards are, or you do have the option to go back to resolve time cards, unresolve that pay period, and combine these all back together into a single payroll resolution. Combining time cards together could potentially change the overtime or double time applied based off of the combined values of the hours for that pay period. Now I'll go back to hiding any previous pay period. And again, I'm only looking at my selected items. I can also hide the items that have been currently resolved. So if I'm working through users one by one, I can individually isolate them as well. We also have the option to filter our users by keywords, user groups, or search for individual users. Now, once you've resolved your time cards, you can click on the resolved view. And here I can see which users have actually been resolved, as indicated by the days in green. From here, I can export all of my resolved time cards to Excel for export into any payroll solution. And that is an overview of working with the payroll user rate type in NIM. For more information, please refer to the NIM documentation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to support@nim-labs.com. Thank you.